The wind moaned low through the red rock canyons, slipping between stones like a thief, cold and cunning. Clara May Holloway crouched near the last embers of her fire, her thin fingers trembling as she cupped them close, willing warmth into her bloodless hands. The flame had shrunk to a weak orange eye, blinking slow in the ash. It would not last the night. Neither might she. She pulled the coat tighter, though it barely covered her shoulders. She'd stolen it off a fence post 2 nights ago, and it smelled of smoke and tobacco and something human. Her dress was torn at the hem, streaked with dust and blood. Her boots had long since lost their soles. Now only rags wrapped her feet, stiff with frost. Beneath the overhang of stone, she was sheltered from the worst of the wind, but not the cold. Never the cold. She hadn't eaten since sunrise, and even then, it had been only a handful of prickly pear fruit, bitter and raw. Hunger coiled like a snake in her belly. But worse than the hunger was the fear, sharp and always listening. Behind her eyes, she saw them again. Remy Sloane's men, drunk and hollering as they rode into the storm. That night, she'd broken loose from the ropes they'd tied her with. She remembered the way the sand howled louder than any voice, the way her legs carried her blind into the desert. She'd run until her vision blurred and her knees buckled. Now she was here, somewhere between nowhere and the last breath of hope. 18 years old, alone in the high frontier, running from devils in the shape of men. She glanced up at the stars. The sky stretched wide, cold and cruel. No comfort in its enormity. She used to think heaven watched over people. Now she wasn't sure heaven watched anything at all. A branch snapped. She turned, heart racing. The fire gave no light now, only a ghostly glow. Her fingers found the small knife she'd taken from one of the men while they slept. Its blade was dull and short, better suited for peeling apples than spilling blood. But it was something. She held it close. Out of the dark came a shape. At first, only the crunch of boots on frozen soil. Then a man stepped into the dim light, long coat brushing his boots, a rifle slung over one shoulder. His beard was salt and pepper, shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His limp was subtle, but it was there. She held the knife up with both hands, shaking. "Don't." The man didn't raise his rifle, didn't speak. He studied her, not with cruelty or pity, but a quiet calculation. His eyes were the color of scorched timber, dark, but not unkind. He knelt by the fire. She flinched as he reached inside his coat, but he only pulled out a small pouch. From it, he shook bits of dried grass and bark into the embers. Then he took a sliver of wood, breathed once, and struck a spark with flint and steel. The flame caught, licking upward like it had been waiting. She watched him with narrow eyes. He didn't look like the others. Too old, too calm. He pulled a piece of jerky from his pocket and placed it beside her without a word. Then, just as silently, he rose and went to his horse, tied off just beyond the rocks. She stared at the food. Hunger clawed at her pride, and eventually, pride gave way. She bit off a corner, chewing slowly, trying not to show how badly she needed it. When he returned, he carried a thick wool blanket and set it across her shoulders. His hands were weathered, strong. She was too cold to protest. Finally he spoke. His voice was low, shaped like the wind itself, steady and unhurried. "You'll never be cold again." She didn't believe him. Not yet. But she didn't look away either. He sat down a few feet from her, facing the fire. No questions. No explanations. She watched him for a long while. The flames danced in his eyes, casting them deeper than before. When sleep finally came, it came without fight. The fire held steady. Her last thought before drifting into the dark was that the stranger hadn't asked her name. And somehow, that made her feel safer. When Clara woke, the sun was no higher than a fingernail above the canyon wall, casting a dusty gold light over everything it touched. The stranger was already standing, sipping something from a tin cup. His horse grazed silently nearby, tail swishing at invisible flies. Her fingers went instinctively to the jerky pouch, still there, untouched beside her. The blanket, too, heavy with warmth and the lingering scent of leather and wood smoke. He hadn't taken anything, not even her knife, which she still clutched beneath the blanket like a child with a talisman. She sat up slowly, stiff from cold and fear. He looked her way. "Coffee." She nodded. He poured from a dented kettle into another cup, then handed it over. She took it with both hands. It burned her tongue, but she didn't care. She drank deep, and the heat ran straight to her chest. "Where you headed?" he asked. She didn't answer. He nodded like he expected that. She studied him in the full light now. His coat was warm but clean, stitched at the shoulder where something sharp had once torn through. His boots were dusty and cracked. On his belt hung a six-shooter, old but polished. Not a bounty hunter. Not a rancher, either. "You got a name?" she asked finally. He looked into his cup. "Eli." She waited, but he didn't offer more. Clara turned her eyes to the fire. "They took everything. My father's land, my brother's horse. I was the last thing they came for." Eli's eyes didn't change. No flare of outrage. No surprise. "They're still out there," she added quietly. "Remy Sloan and his men. They'll be looking for me. I stole from them." "What did you steal?" "Myself." Eli nodded once. "That's worth stealing." She wasn't sure if he was mocking her or not, but something about the way he said it made her throat tighten. He stood again and kicked sand over the fire. "We ride. You stay still. They'll find you." "I don't ride." "You will today." She hesitated, then rose. Her legs ached. Her feet throbbed with every step. Eli gave her a hand up onto the horse, then climbed behind her without ceremony. She'd expected the saddle to be rough, but the leather was broken in and steady. The horse moved like it knew the land better than it knew rest. They rode east, toward the deeper canyons where the wind changed pitch between the rocks. The sky widened around them, great and pale blue, while vultures wheeled far above like dark question marks. Clara didn't speak. Neither did Eli. Not until the sun was high and they stopped beneath a jagged bluff. "There's a shack yonder," he said, pointing to a near-invisible split in the canyon wall. "Old friend's place. Ain't been used in years. We rest there." The shack was little more than boards nailed into the stone, but it held 4 walls and a roof, and to Clara, that made it a palace. Inside, she sat on a crate while Eli scanned the ridgeline through a spyglass. When he handed it to her, she looked too. At first, she saw nothing but heat haze and brush. Then movement. 3 riders, slow and deliberate, dust trailing behind like long shadows. She handed the spyglass back. Her hands trembled. "They found me." Eli didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. "What do we do?" He checked the chamber of his revolver. "We think. You said I'd never be cold again." "I meant it." "But they'll kill you." I've been dead before." His voice was so flat, so final, that she had no words. Something about the way he stood, his shoulders still, his face unreadable, told her she'd stumbled onto someone who wasn't made for soft things. He carried silence the way others carried rifles, always ready to draw. She sat back, heart pounding in her ears. Eli opened a satchel and laid out bullets like a man counting his debts. Then he took from it a long knife, blackened with age, and laid it beside the revolver. "You ever shot a gun?" he asked. She shook her head. He handed her a small pistol, light, silver-handled. "You might need to." Clara stared at it. The handle felt colder than the desert wind. "They'll come through the East Pass," he said. "Only way through the rocks with horses. You stay behind the wall. If someone gets close, don't think, just pull." She wanted to tell him she couldn't, that she wasn't like him, but he was already outside, melting into the rock like a ghost. She crouched low, peeking through the warped wood slats of the shack. The riders came slow, rifles resting easy across their laps. One wore a hat with a red feather, Remy Sloan. She knew that plume, had seen it each time he loomed over her, laughing as he kicked dirt across the fire her brother had built. They stopped about 50 paces out. "Clara," Sloan's voice carried across the silence. "You got 2 choices, girl. Come out nice and proper, or we drag you back like a hog on a spit." No response. Just wind. Then a single shot cracked the air. One of the riders jerked sideways and fell clean off his horse. Chaos bloomed. Eli moved like a shadow with a purpose, each bullet precise and final. The second man barely had time to aim before Eli's rifle barked again. He crumpled behind his horse's legs. Sloan turned, spurred his horse, but Clara, shaking, breath ragged, stood and raised the silver pistol. Her fingers squeezed before her thoughts could catch up. The shot went wide. Sloan turned to fire, but Eli was already there, close enough to see the surprise in the outlaw's eyes. The sound of the final shot echoed like thunder in the canyon, bouncing off stone and sky. Sloan dropped. The red feather drifted down after him, slow as snowfall. Clara stared. The pistol fell from her hand. Eli walked back, calm as ever, rifle cradled like an old friend. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. And just like that, the silence returned. The canyon held its breath. The three bodies lay where they'd fallen, two in the dust, one sprawled across the rocks with his red-feathered hat flapping in the wind. Clara couldn't move. Her legs had gone stiff, her hands dumb and slow. The silver pistol lay beside her boot, forgotten. A thin trail of smoke still curled from the barrel, dancing like a spirit on its way out of this world. Eli was already dragging the corpses to the gulch. He didn't grunt, didn't curse. He moved like a man who'd done this sort of thing before, not with pleasure, but with the same steady rhythm a blacksmith uses to hammer iron. Efficient, final, silent. Clara turned her eyes away, sick rising in her throat. When he returned, he wiped the blood from his knife with an old kerchief and tossed the rag into the fire pit. "They won't find him," he said. "You've done this before," she whispered, not really asking. He didn't reply, just crouched by the fire pit and began to build a flame from the dry bits of kindling tucked in the wall's shadow. The fire caught quickly, small but stubborn. "You were waiting," Clara said after a moment. "You knew they'd come." "I knew men like Sloan," he said, "and I've seen what they do." She wanted to ask where he came from, who taught him to shoot like that, to move like smoke and vanish like nightfall. But something in his expression warned her. Some truths came with too high a cost. Instead, she said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." Eli didn't look up. Bury the past. Then build something new. He might have been talking about the outlaws, or her family, or himself. She couldn't tell. By nightfall, the wind had shifted. It howled through the canyon like an old song, stirring the dust and rattling the tin roof above. Clara sat inside the shack while Eli stood at the door, a shadow against the dim stars. She spoke softly. "My brother, Nate, he used to say there were two kinds of men, the ones who run from fire and the ones who carry it in their hands." Eli didn't turn, but his voice reached her like a wind just before a storm. "Which one was he?" "He carried it. Got himself killed for it." Eli was silent for a long while. "Most who carry it do." She shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of his words. Later, as she tried to sleep, the memories came back, not just the night she ran, but the quiet days before. Her father sitting on the porch carving wood, her brother breaking a colt in the corral, her mother humming while sewing a patchwork quilt. All of it gone, burned out like candle stubs in the dark. And yet, here she was, alive. "Come morning." Eli handed her a worn saddlebag. "There's coin in there," he said. "Food for a week, if you're careful. I marked a trail to Copper Hollow. Town sheriff's decent. You tell him what happened. He'll believe you." She looked at the bag, then back at him. "You're not coming." He shook his head. "Can't." "Why?" Eli studied the horizon. "Not the first time Remy Sloan's name crossed my path. I rode with him once. Long time ago. Different life." She blinked. "You were one of them." "For a while," he said. "Long enough to know I never want to be again." Her breath caught. The careful way he'd moved. The way he'd known where the riders would come. It all fit. "And yet, you saved me." "I owed someone. Maybe not you, but someone." Clara's voice dropped. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve the truth." She looked away. The air between them thickened. "I can't take your money," she said. "You already took your life back. That's worth more." He stepped toward his horse, tightening the straps with the familiarity of habit. She moved without thinking, closing the distance between them. "I don't care what you were," she said. I care what you did. Eli didn't smile, but something in his shoulders softened. You got fight in you, he said. You just don't know it yet. She reached into the saddlebag and pulled out the silver-handled pistol. I want to learn. Eli paused, then took the gun gently from her hand, checked the chamber, cleaned the barrel with a cloth, then placed it back in her palm. First lesson, he said. Never point it at something unless you're ready to end it. She nodded. Her fingers no longer trembled. They rode together that morning, away from the shack, deeper into the open plains. Clara didn't ask where they were headed. It didn't matter. Something told her the past was done clawing at her heels. But as they crested a ridge and the land opened wide before them, Eli slowed. Ahead lay a single rider, waiting beneath a lone cottonwood. Broad-shouldered, face hidden by a low-brimmed hat. Eli tensed. So did Clara. The stranger didn't move. Eli dismounted slowly, eyes locked on the figure. Stay back, he told Clara. The stranger lifted his head. Took you long enough. Eli's mouth pressed into a line. Didn't think you'd follow. I never stopped. Clara could barely breathe. Eli stepped forward. She's not part of this. The man chuckled, a low, bitter sound. That's the thing about ghosts. They don't care who's watching. Eli turned to Clara. Get back on the horse. Ride north. Don't stop until you see the river. What about you? He looked at her then, and something in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before, made her heart skip. I promised you'd never be cold again. He turned back toward the man under the tree, and Clara rode. Clara didn't look back. The sound of wind swallowed everything. Hoofbeats, heartbeats, gunfire imagined or real. She rode hard, the mare galloping beneath her like it knew the stakes. The canyon narrowed behind her, the air thinner, colder. But ahead the light opened. Blue sky broke through the clouds like a blessing. The river, Eli had said. She kept her eyes on that promise. By midday, she pulled the mare to a slow trot, her legs trembling, jaw tight from clenching too long. No sound of pursuit, no sign of Eli, only the endless hush of wild country, the distant hush of birds, and the thud of her own breath. She dismounted by a cottonwood and knelt to drink from the shallows. The water was cold, clear, and cruel. It carried no comfort. Only the ache of knowing he'd stayed behind. She whispered into the wind. You promised. That night she built her own fire. The sparks caught slower than Eli's, but they caught. She wrapped herself in the blanket he'd packed. The pistol rested beside her, gleaming dully. She didn't sleep much, but she didn't shiver either. In the morning, she found her way to Copper Hollow. It wasn't much, for crooked streets, a leaning steeple, and a sheriff with eyes too tired for his age. She told him everything. He didn't ask many questions, just listened. When she mentioned Eli's name, something flickered across his face, a memory, maybe, or a warning. Saw him ride through here once, the sheriff said. Quiet, the kind that already knows the weight of a coffin. Clara straightened. I want to post a letter, just in case. To who? She hesitated. He'll know. Weeks passed. She took a job at the general store, sweeping the floor, sorting sugar sacks, counting change with calloused hands. She worked like someone who needed to forget, but hadn't earned the right. At night, she practiced with the pistol, firing into hay bales behind the stables, steadying her breath like he'd taught her. She missed more than she hit, but the sound no longer startled her. Then, one morning, a rider came through, dust-covered, coat torn at the shoulder, blood on his collarbone that had long since dried. He didn't say much, just walked into the store and placed a single coin on the counter. Clara froze. The rider tipped his hat. He said you'd want this back. He placed something next to the coin, a kerchief, frayed and stained at the edge. Her breath caught. She recognized the pattern, the cloth Eli had used to wipe blood from his blade. Is he? The man didn't answer. Just shook his head once, not no, not yes. Then he walked out. She stood there long after he'd gone. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat beside her fire in the small shack she'd rented behind the blacksmith's, fingers curled around the kerchief, like it might speak. It didn't, but it stayed warm in her hand. Spring came, and with it, windflowers on the ridge. Clara moved again south, to a ranch that needed hands and offered land for those who earned it. She built a cabin from scrap pine, small but hers. She worked the soil, mended fences, taught herself to ride better. She carried the pistol everywhere. And sometimes, she swore she saw his shape on the hilltop, hat low, silhouette against the sun, but when she blinked, he was gone. In time, folks started calling her Miss Clara, and kids asked her to show them how to shoot. She told stories, never about Eli by name, but about a quiet man who once said, "You'll never be cold again." When the sheriff from Copper Hollow rode through her land years later, older and slower, he tipped his hat and said, "Didn't think you'd make a home out here." Clara smiled. "Didn't think I could." He looked at her hands, calloused, steady, and nodded. "Guess you were always more fire than frost." She watched him ride away, then turned back toward her cabin. That night, she sat by her own fire, no longer dying, just dancing, steady and bright. The wind pressed against the door, but couldn't get in. She wrapped herself in the old blanket, held the pistol in her lap, and for the first time in a long time, she closed her eyes and slept warm.